Bellying up to the 9-foot homemade oak bar, my name is Craig Toth, your host of Minor League News and Brews, talking about everything around the Pirates minor league system and giving you some beer reviews at the end of the show. For those of you who are thinking this may be a reaction to the Endy Rodriguez season-ending injury/surgery, the Rowdy Tellez signing, the impending, it looks like, signing of Andrew McCutchen, Robbie no longer being on the broadcast, the RSN being signed. Nope. This is just going to be a regular episode of Minor League News and Brews. Chris and I will get to all those topics and hopefully a little bit more in next week's episode of Bucs in the Basement. And I was kind of wondering exactly what I was going to talk about today, just because as the offseason kind of trolls along, there isn't much going on in the minor league system. Yes, as some people may know, the Pirates did on this last day of international free agent signings, they did make a signing 25-year-old right-handed Cuban Emmanuel Chapman, no relation to Aroldis Chapman, to a deal. I don't have a whole lot on him. I do know that he had defected from Cuba back in April, had seen some, I guess it would be backfield videos of him. Do know that he throws a pretty mean fastball coming in around like 93, topping out at 98, usually right around like 95. Not a whole lot of stats on him. Didn't pitch that much down in Cuba, so we'll kind of have to see how that works out. Was wondering what they were going to do with the money acquired from the Texas Rangers for Austin Hedges. Part of that going in a trade to the Yankees to get a minor league outfielder, and yes, that is a minor league deal. Was a guy who, had some promise at one point in time, had made it up to the Yankees organization, but didn't really make a whole lot of noise. But yeah, going to be talking about what are my votes of confidence, and to kind of assist me in this. And it's votes of confidence because people have always asked me, like, which minor league players would you trade? Which ones do you have, the most confidence to succeed? And kind of breaking it down, a lot of the times when I do this, if anybody hasn't, sitting right here on my desk, underneath all my papers, I've read it countless times. It is Future Value, the battle for baseball soul, and how teams will find the next superstar. That's from Eric Longenhagen at Fangraphs, ESPN's Kylie McDaniel, talking about future value. And for those of you who aren't familiar with future value, this is going to be very informative for you. For those that are familiar with it, please bear with me. This is going to be a quick refresher course for all of you. And for future value, it does also go along that 20/80 scouting scale. But it's a little bit different for hitters and for pitchers. A lot of times we've broken down players and given their grades as far as, the different types of pitches they throw for pitchers, power, speed, hit tool, fielding for the position players. So for this, the first thing is in the hitters. And a lot of times you may have heard Chris and I talk in terms of WAR. And this kind of goes hand in hand when you look at those future values for players. So on the hitter end, a hitter with a future value of 20 would be seen as organizational depth. And this would be those players that you may not even see make it up to the major leagues, but they're sitting down there almost as, the fire extinguisher, break in case of emergency type of players. There's not really a war associated with them. The next value, 30, this would be like your quad A players. These are the guys that they usually put that are right at replacement level, or more than likely slightly below replacement level, the zero point 0.0 war. Somebody who's given a 40 value, that's like your bench pieces. Those are the guys that are 0 war to zero point 0.7 war. Moving along to 45, that's a guy who would be a low end regular player to like a platoon player. You're looking at a 0.8 war to about a 1.5 war for that type of player. On the Pirates, major league roster, I mean, the guy that kind of fits the bill, I mean, I guess it'd be like, it's not the round peg in a square hole, or the square peg in a round hole. The guy that would fit this most succinctly would be a player like Connor Joe. A 50 on this scale is your average everyday player, 1.6 to 2.4. I always say, when like looking at WAR for a position player, if a player's WAR, I usually use 2 for this. That player is more than likely good enough to be an everyday player on your roster. You don't, necessarily want to have a bunch of 2 wars around the diamond. You want to have some guys that go above that, obviously. But if you have a guy that is right around a 2 war, that's a guy that could be an everyday player in the major leagues. 55 is your above average regular, and that goes from 2.5 war to 3.3 war. And then you get into the real cream of the crop of the players, the 60 future values, and that's your all-star level. A player that is 3.4 war to 4.9 war really fits into those guys that, could be elected to the all-star team and actually be deserving of that election to the all-star team. A 70 grade player, I mean, these are few and far between. These are like the top 10 overall players, and that's going from like a 5 war player to a 7 war player. And then the 80 future value, that's like a top 5 overall player. Those are the guys that are going for your MVP votes. That's anybody who's above 7 war. Looking at the Pirates minor league system as it stands right now, until we get the updates for the 2024 season, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about here on Minor League News and Brews, the Pirates position player who has the highest future value is Termarr Johnson. Really no surprise there. He is a 55 future value, and these values are kind of fluid. It's not that if they're given this value, it's the value that will stick with them, throughout the minor leagues. We see, discussions held on X and Facebook and different stuff like that to see, if a player could regress and get a lower future value, but more than likely if they would get that bump up higher. Right now, as it stands, Termarr Johnson would fall in that above average regular. That's kind of the expectation for him, a 2.5 to 3.3 war player. And it's a pretty steep drop off from Termarr on the position side of things, especially when you look at how far, most of these players are away from the major leagues. You have Yordany De Los Santos. He's a 45, not above low A. You have Tony Blanco Jr., a Dominican player, more than likely a Florida Complex League player next year at 40 plus. Estar Suaro, he's a 40 plus. You may remember him as being one of the acquisitions in the G-Man Choi Rich Hill trade with the San Diego Padres, the quintessential lottery ticket type player, but does have some value at this point in time. Looking down to the 40s, another player that was acquired. This one would have been in the Carlos Santana trade with the Milwaukee Brewers. Gianni Severino, he is a 40 future value, and those 40 guys right now are looking at being bench players. Like I said, obviously, player performs well, you will see that future value go up. And the last one on that 40 future value is Mitch Jebb, drafted by the Pirates in the second round out of Michigan State. We will see him hopefully in high A Greensboro to begin the season. Landed in Bradenton this year, the guy with the funky swing. But, I mean, looking back a few years, I mean, the Pirates definitely had more players on this list that would have been a lot higher. But with all of the graduations and debuts that occurred last year, players like Endy Rodriguez, Henry Davis, Nick Gonzalez, Leover Peguero, there is been a significant drop off in that depth with the position players specifically. Moving on to the pitchers, and for pitchers, the WAR obviously is going to be a little bit different because there's not really bench players, but there could be relievers, and some of these guys, I mean, we won't see ranked as high. We all know who's going to be number one, but before we get to that, we'll go through the future value rankings. 20, once again, organizational depth. Not really a guy that you may see on your major league roster. Then you have those quad A players coming in at a 30 future value. Usually a guy that comes up and, at least registers some sort of WAR. A lot of the times it's like the negative WAR, but it'll be like a 0.1, a 0.2. But, not really something to be relied upon. The 40 future value is seen as like a back end starter. This would be probably like your, sixth guy in your rotation, the swingmen possibly. That's a 0 WAR to a 0.9 WAR. 45 is when you actually get into, kind of the meat of your rotation, a 4 or a 5. And this is guys that are from like 1 to like 1.7 WAR. 50 future value, that's like a solidified number 4, pushing up towards the 3, but not, enough to actually get to that point. That's a 1.8 to 2.5 WAR. The 55s are the definite 3s and 4s. Kind of like your middle of the rotation type of guys. That's about a 2.6 to a 3.4. And then you have the 60 future value. That is your solidified number 3 guy. That's a 3.5 to 4.9 WAR. 70 future value, moving up to the front end of the rotation, slotting in at about a number 2. It's not going to be your number 1 guy, but definitely a very good major league pitcher, and that is, around a 5 to a 7 WAR. And then at 80, you have the number 1s, your prototypical aces, and that's a guy that would be, up above a 7 WAR. And so, like, basically, I'm thinking a lot of people are thinking that when I'm going to talk about our number 1 guy, and we all know who the number 1 guy is, And right now, his future value, Paul Skeens, a lot of people are going to be surprised that right now his future value sits at a 60. I mean, he did perform well at LSU, but didn't get a lot of run in professional baseball, topping out in Double A Altoona, but really, you know, a little bit over 6 innings, and that was it. But he's coming in at 60. You know, that right now would be projecting to be a number 3, a 3.5 to 4.9 WAR. It's a very, you know, safe place to put him. Quinn Priester coming in next on the list at a 50. We have a couple 45 pluses, and those would be in the form of Mike Burrows and Bubba Chandler. Mike Burrows more than likely would have made his debut last year if it wasn't for the Tommy John surgery. Hopefully looking for him, you know, at some point, you know, during the middle of the season, but we'll have to see how that turns out. Jared Jones, the pitcher who is probably closest to making his debut, who hasn't made his debut yet, coming in at 45. And just as a reminder right now, in the future value, that would be a 4 or a 5, a 1 to a 1.7 WAR. We also have Thomas Harrington and Anthony Solometto also with a 45. Thomas Harrington down a little bit lower. Should see him in Altoona this year to begin the season, I would think. But last year, a lot of people thought he would show up in Greensboro to begin the season and didn't. So, I mean, it could be giving him some, you know, a little bit of a runway to get started in Greensboro before that promotion. Solomito, I mean, definitely, you know, pitched a decent amount in Altoona, wore out towards the end of the season. But, I mean, I could see him also being in Altoona again, giving a little bit of that runway, getting a quick promotion to Indianapolis. But, I mean, as you can see, there is a little bit more of a stack of pitching prospects. Some guys that are a little bit closer. We saw the hitting kind of ahead of the pitching. Now we see the pitching being a little bit ahead of the hitting, even though a lot of the guys that were promoted to the majors last year are those hitters, those position players. So it's kind of hard to judge exactly who's ahead of who at this point. I think that Pirates fans are just hoping that at some point it all catches up together and, you know, brings us a competitive team in Pittsburgh. Before I get to my votes of confidence for this episode of Minor League News and Brews, just wanted to give everybody a little bit of history. I went back and looked at the top 100 prospects according to Fangraphs going the whole way back to 2017. At that point in time, Yoan Moncada was the number 1 prospect in baseball. He had a 70 future value. To this point in his career, Yoan Moncada has accumulated 14.8 WAR, an average of 2.42 WAR per season. So that really would not live up to that, 70 future value. And the number 5 prospect this year, a guy who, I loved, still wish him the best. But Austin Meadows, just to show you how some of this stuff shakes out at points in time. Back then, he was given a 65 future value. To this point in his career, he has accumulated 5.9 WAR, averaging 1.16 WAR per season. Not great. Not great. Moving up to 2018, and for those of you that don't know, We are the sister podcast of Sox in the Basement. I guess we might actually be the daughter podcast because that one kind of came out first. So I don't know if we're the baby podcast or if we're the sister podcast, but there is a Sox podcast. So on this one in 2018, I kind of looked at the White Sox players who were in the top 100 in comparison to the Pirates players. I'm not really comparing, but just to give everybody kind of an idea. At the time, Eloy Jimenez was the number 3 ranked prospect in all of baseball, had a 65 future value. At this point, he has a 5.4 WAR, and per season, that breaks down to 1.08 WAR per season. A guy who has really started to pick it up at number 27 is Luis Robert. He was a 55 future value at the time. He is 11.6 WAR so far in his career, 2.9 WAR per season. A guy that I kind of skipped over just because he's actually going to be 24, but you'll see why, because it's like 2 pitchers I wanted to put together. But at number 34, Ke'Bryan Hayes came in at a 55 future value. That is 9.9 WAR over his career, 3.22 WAR per season. Very consistent for Ke'Bryan Hayes. And the 2 guys that I put together, coming in at number 24 was Michael Kopech with a 55 future value. He has accumulated 1.9 WAR so far in his career. Good for 0.47 WAR per season. Not great. Not great. At number 38, Mitch Keller, also a 55 future value, 7.5 WAR for his career, 1.86 WAR per season, and we are seeing that start to climb, and hopefully it continues to climb. And let's add an extension onto that just to make Pirates fans happy at this point in time. Would make me very happy. And then in 2020, because really once you get past that, you don't really get to see a whole lot of a player to try to see like how that future value is breaking out at this point in time. But I got some pretty interesting ones for you guys at this point. Number 6 is Jared Kelenic. He was a 60 future value at that point in time, a 0.7 WAR for his career, 0.59 per season. Ke'Bryan Hayes bumped up from number 34 to number 15 in between those couple of years, saw his future value go up to 60. Once again, he's 9.9 WAR for his career, 3.22 per season, very consistent. And then number 17, Andrew Vaughn, going back to the White Sox, first baseman for the White Sox, a 60 future value at that point in time. So far, he has accumulated negative 0.6 WAR on his career, averaging negative 0.2 WAR per season. Not very good, and Pirates fans want to trade for him. So getting to my votes of confidence, what this has all been building up towards, I guess, throughout this. And a lot of times for me, like the confidence, it also goes along with where the player is within the Pirate systems. The guys that are higher up usually get a little bit more of a confidence rating from me as opposed to a lower one. So for me, the guys that I'm, most confident in should be no surprise. Skeens, Jones, Solomito, Jackson Wolf, another player that was acquired from the Padres in the deal that I spoke about previously. Bubba Chandler, and Mike Burrows if healthy. Moving on to the middle ground, some guys that I'm kind of wavering back and forth on from time to time. Little bit of surprise at the top with Tamar Johnson. Moving on to Thomas Harrington, Sung Chae Chang, and Mitch Jebb. I know Mitch Jebb is lower, does come with some pedigree. Ashcraft and Chang are two guys that we should see this season, or towards the beginning of next season, especially with Chang, depending on the level. But we have seen them added to the 40-man. And the other guys, I couldn't put not confident, but I kind of did. I put not confident, but hopeful. And these guys are Yordani De Los Santos, Young Shuk Shim, Jack Brannigan, Hunter Barco, and the trio of young pitchers, Michael Kennedy, Owen Kellington, and Xander Muth. In the upcoming episodes here, I'm looking that I probably will start to look at players that have been linked to the Pirates during this upcoming international signing period. May do a little bit more of a breakdown once we find out more about some of the players that were signed later on in the period that just ended today on December 15th. But definitely going to have to start looking towards that as that opens about a month from today.
A pitcher of beer, a pitcher of beer, let's order another pitcher of beer. That pitcher of beer should come over here. I love that pitcher of beer.
Was super busy, didn't get to drink a ton of Christmas ales here. I had 2 left over in the 6-pack that I had bought, before I went to my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's for Thanksgiving. So we're going to get a couple of Christmas ales here, and then a couple of beers that got stuck somehow in the back of a fairly empty garage beer fridge, but they got lost. One of them is one that I had over the summer, and it was bought by the same brother-in-law who brought you the Thanksgiving episode of Brews from Minor League News and Brews. But he had bought it for us when we were down in Tennessee. And the last one is an Oktoberfest that I must have lost track of. So first off, the beer that my brother bought me, it is from Native American Brewing. It is a Sunrise Hard Vanilla Spiced Ale. And this one is kind of a mix between a spiced ale and like a hard seltzer. Because the way they described it was like a club soda, which it actually was, and it was quite delicious, but there was that fizz to it, which was kind of weird to me, but it came in at 5%, and I actually really liked it for what it was. So this one is actually going to go upwards in the WOBA, because it's not a thing that I would normally drink, a beer, I guess, that I would normally drink, or a hard cream soda beer. I gave this one a 350, knocked that up to 400. The next one was the Lost Oktoberfest from Goose Island, coming in at 5.7%. Give that one a 425, knock it down to 375. The 6-pack, the 2 that were left from the first Christmas Ale 6-pack that I picked up, we have the Shiner Holiday Cheer, which is a holiday ale mixed with peaches and pecans, or pecans, or however you pronounce that word. Give that one a 375, knock it down to 325, only 5.4%. Not a real big fan of the mix of the peaches and the pecans. Like I said, a lot of these Christmas ales sometimes will get a little bit, I don't know, let's get weird, I guess it would be. Some of them I really like. Some of them, are combinations I could kind of do without. At least it's not the ones where I'm basically tasting a holiday candle where it's just like basically a punch in the face of nutmeg. But that one was pretty good. And this last one, I mean, I've had a billion times. It's the old reliable. If you go to like a Permanis around here, I'm trying to think of a couple other places that may not have a lot of craft beers on tap, but the one thing they always will have, I mean, it's usually around the same price as like the icy lights and stuff. So you can usually get a tall, like a 22, 23 ounce of this. And that's Samuel Adams Winter Lager, 5.6%. This one, I could just drink this one all day. But it's usually like that old reliable one you go to. I give that one a 400, knock it down to 350. And like I said, probably going to start looking at some of the international players. May look at, some of the minor league signings from the Pirates more in depth. Mention them with Chris on Bucs in the Basement, but may do a little bit more of a deep dive on some of those in the upcoming weeks. But I will be back next week and hope you guys have a good one until then.